So I ran into a front derailleur issue while putting a bike together recently, and thought maybe one of these E-type front derailleurs could help me solve it. I wanted to use one of the more modern ones from the 10 or 11 speed era, but my frame didn't have the necessary braze-on for it. I noticed the older generation didn't require a braze-on, and I couldn't figure out if the newer generation could be used without it as well. I looked around at some documentation online, but my specific use case wasn't mentioned. I posted about it on a popular bike tech forum, and the response was... So I decided to pick one up and try it out. So here I am trying to answer the question that actually no one cares about the answer to. I'll start by explaining what I was trying to do and what issue I ran into. I was updating the cyclocross bike, a specialized crux, and I wanted to use lower gearing. It actually came with a decent range, but I wanted a little bit more for hillier terrain. My preferred way of doing that is using a modern mountain bike crankset. This one has a 36-26 tooth combo, so I can get low gearing without having to use a giant cassette. The issue was the frame only supports braze-on front derailleurs, and modern mountain bike front derailleurs are not made for these road-style frame braze-ons. I couldn't use a regular clamp-style mountain bike derailleur because the frame uses non-standard tubing, so no clamp would fit and I'd risk damaging the frame. I actually did this once before on another frame with the same front derailleur attachment. In that case I used a Road triple braze-on derailleur which worked with the frame. It didn't quite match the tooth profile of the mountain bike crankset, and the attachment didn't allow for much vertical adjustment, so the derailleur sat much too high above the crankset. It was kind of messy, but it did work. While riding, I needed to shift twice to go up and only once to go down, but I had access to the full range of gears and didn't drop the chain once I dialed in the limit screws and the cable tension. In practice, front shifting can be a bit more forgiving than the rear, especially when you're only using 2 chain rings. That said, it was far from perfect, and I was hoping to improve upon it with this build. So I started thinking the E-type front derailleur might be the right solution. The E-type uses the frame's bottom bracket shell to hold it in place. The early versions were only held in place by the bottom bracket, but more modern generations, like the one I'm trying to use, required an additional bolt to attach them to the seat tube. The even more modern versions have 2 bolts to hold the derailleur and can be held in place without even needing the bottom bracket cage at all. Since the earlier versions could be held in place just by the bottom bracket alone, I thought I'd try it with the more modern ones that would fit very well with my 11-speed crankset. So I bought one and tried to test it out by putting a bolt through the hole that would normally secure it to the frame. It was pretty quickly apparent whether or not this would work. You can see here the derailleur is much too loose to function properly. The cage design is completely different from the older version, and it flexes way too much without being secured to the seat tube. I couldn't try the older version because it only supports top pulling cables and I needed a down pulling one for this frame. If a bottom pulling version of the original design exists, it might work, but it wouldn't match the speeds and tooth count of the chain rings of modern drivetrain. In the end, I stuck with the Road triple, which works imperfectly but gets the job done. Front derailleurs are super unpopular, so I don't expect this to get any better in the near future. Anyway, let me know if this video was helpful, and happy riding out there.